This is Zoe Metcalfe. She's the North Yorkshire Police Fire and Crime Commissioner. She has been since November 2021. It is her job to challenge the police, and if they're not doing their job properly, make them accountable, to make sure they protect us and keep us safe. She can also hold the Chief Constable to account. Months she holds public accountability meetings, and it's where you can ask questions about the police and the fire service. I'm not going to talk about the fire service because this video is about the police, so I'm just going to forget about that for now. And this month, the questions are about the HMICFR's National Child Protection Inspection that they did of North Yorkshire Police in November of 2021. A number of people in the meeting, including Lisa Winward, who's the Chief Constable of North Yorkshire Police, Caroline Blackburn, the Interim Assistant Chief Executive Officer of the PFCC, Tom Thorpe, Interim Assistant Chief Executive Officer of the PFCC, Jenny Newbury, Head of Commissioning and Partnerships Office of the PFCC, Lindsay Butterfield, Assistant Chief Constable, North Yorkshire Police, and Fiona Wynne, Detective Superintendent, Head of Safeguarding of North Yorkshire Police. So there's a lot of very qualified and experienced officers in the meeting. The HMICFRS was quite a shocking read. It stated that the force allocates some investigations to officers without the right skills and experience. I mean, it's quite unbelievable. The investigator also stated that they found inexperienced officers without the proper accreditation or training managing some abuse investigations. This includes investigators, supervisors, and those responsible for conducting strategy discussions. So they were actually using unqualified, inexperienced and untrained officers, which is it's beyond this. You just can't believe it. It's incredulous that this could be happening. So I was aware this had been happening from as far back, I had proof, as 2014, and I wanted to know why something that was so obvious that you would need highly trained officers, very experienced and certainly with the right qualifications to be doing these complex child sexual abuse investigations that are usually against obviously abusers, but usually very manipulative, narcissistic abusers, why they were using officers that weren't up to the mark to do it. So I put forward this question. This was my question that I emailed and I tweeted at them, and I put a summary. It has been discovered that in 2014 child sexual abuse investigation and trial, you had used an unqualified DI who do not have the relevant experience, training or qualifications to oversee a CSA investigation. A letter written on the 14th of May 2018 from Detective Chief Inspector S. Fincham assured the victims that lessons would be learnt and implemented. So why, so many years later, are you still using officers that are inexperienced, without the proper accreditation or training to manage some child abuse investigations? This has been stated on point 7 under the title Investigation of the HMICFRS National Child Protection Inspection Report. My questions are, number 1, why after so many years of such serious failings being exposed are you still using inexperienced officers without the correct accreditation or training? And number 2, will you be apologising to the victim for A, using an unqualified and inexperienced officer that falsely claimed to be a DI, and B, for not implementing the changes that S. Fincham promised in their letter dated 14th of May 2018? So I had all the evidence, the letter was sent, the Fincham stated that this was, lessons would be learnt and that the changes would be implemented, but yet 8 years on, they were still using inexperienced, untrained and unqualified officers, and it took a report to tell them that it was wrong. How did they not know that? These are the people that you are trusting your lives with. These are the people that children, the most vulnerable people in society, they're trusting them and their parents are trusting them to do the most complex investigations with the most complex people, the most manipulative abusers that can ride roughshod over the place, and yet they weren't using the best of the best to do these cases. No wonder there's been so many failings. After that, I got the usual fob off email, and they put, I will have to check whether this is a question we can answer publicly as it relates to specific cases. Well, they're police investigating crime, so every single investigation will relate to a specific case. So I emailed back to them and said that all failings by the police relate to specific cases. The reason for the report is investigating the handling of all specific cases. The HMICFR report is full of case studies regarding specific cases. As long as the name is admitted, it can be and should be responded to. It's an accountability meeting. It is all fact, which I can prove, and no name is mentioned, so it can be answered. Zoe Metcalfe has ignored this and other concerns when I've informed her privately, and has also refused to act even when contacted by my MP. Publicly is the only way. Ignoring it is not going to go away. So I sent that, and they responded back with an edited version. But it cut the main basis of the question out, and this is what they wanted to say then. They wanted to say, what developments have been made to put this right? And will you be apologising to victims for not using officers without the right skills and experience? So they cut out the fact that it was from 2014, because my point was they'd taken 8 years to work it out. So that had cut out. There was nothing from that first question that suggested to the public that they've known about this for at least 8 years. It might be longer. That's how long I've known of it. And they cut out personally apologising to the victims. Will you be apologising to victims? So they didn't even think after these disastrous mistakes that the victims were worthy of an apology. They had knowingly used untrained, inexperienced, unqualified officers to carry out investigations into the most complex cases for the most vulnerable people in society, child sexual abuse victims and child sexual exploitation victims, and they knew this and they failed the victims, and they don't even think that they should actually apologise to each victim for doing that. And put it into another context, if you went into open heart surgery or any surgery, knee surgery or anything, and the surgeon said to you before you went into that operating theatre, oh, by the way, I'm not qualified and I haven't had a right lot of experience and I'm not trained, would you go ahead with it? No, you wouldn't. And I bet you any money, any parent that had a child that was being investigated, that case was being investigated or went to trial, if they'd have known and they were told that the person that was overseeing that trial, overseeing that investigation, was not qualified, was not experienced, and hadn't had the correct training, they would never have put their children through the court system. So I agreed to edit the question. I didn't think my question should be edited, but I agreed to it because I wanted to get something across, because I know how hard it is to get North Yorkshire Police to do anything. It's like pulling hen's teeth. So I actually put the question about, and I put, what developments have been made to put this right, and why have these changes taken so long? So I cut out the 2014 and I put taken so long to be implemented when you have been aware of this, and I put number of years. And the second question, will you be apologising personally to each individual victim where officers without the right skills, qualification and experience were used to oversee their child sexual abuse investigation? So notice there it says apologising personally, and it says about the right skills, qualification, experience, and it says about child sexual abuse investigations, not just investigations, the very, very serious ones, rape, child sexual abuse, murder, your top investigations. You see the video, which is where they have completely edited my questions, put my name to them. I never said anything of the sort. And then they've taken the main body of the question out. They completely fobbed it off with a generic reply, and then I don't give a stuff attitude. I'll let you see what they've put.
So this question is from Jane from Bentham, and it's about safeguarding again. Section 7 of the HMICFRS report says that force allocates some investigations to officers without the right skills and experience. What developments have been made to put this right? Will you be apologising to victims for not using officers without the right skills and experience? Lindsay.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Jane, for your question. I'll start with the apology if I can. We have publicly apologised, the Chief has apologised to any victim that we may have failed as a result of our previous processes and systems. And the Chief Constable and the Deputy Chief Constable have been very open and honest about that. In relation to moving forward then, I've touched already on the specialist training and portfolios for our investigators, making sure that they are trained and accredited to deliver the best possible service to those children and young people. We've also worked really closely with the HMIC, with the College of Policing and other forces that are performing particularly well in this area to understand best practice and then bring that into North Yorkshire. And that's resulted in a revised crime allocation policy, making sure that the most serious crimes are allocated to investigators with those skills to be able to deliver the best possible service.
So you just heard there Lindsay Butterfield speaking, and she had said there was a revised crime allocation policy, so another new name, another new policy, making sure the most serious crimes are allocated to investigators with those skills to be able to deliver the best possible service. This is 2022 and they've only just worked out that the best people to do the investigation is the most experienced, with the most qualifications and with the most training. And they're doing this into an allocation policy and making it up. And she's turning around and saying, oh, well, you know, the Chief Constable apologised. Well, I support victims of child sexual abuse and I've never heard the apology. But that's not good enough. You've got to be apologising to every single person that you failed, particularly when it's such a simple failing. You know, it's so obvious. A child would know that to do the most complex crimes, you need the most intelligent, the most qualified, the most trained and the most experienced people. Because if you don't use that, you should be running and apologising to those victims. So I tweeted on Twitter immediately. I was fuming when I saw this, heard this fob off crap to my edited questions. So I went onto Twitter and asked them to remove it because my name was next to those questions and I never asked those questions. And then they tweeted back, as confident, as cocky as anything, oh, you know, thanks for that, contact our offices. I wasn't wasting another minute of my life contacting them for another fob off. So I responded back and I said, no, I can't. You can see in plain sight what you've done. Anyone with one brain cell can, that they'd altered my questions and taken out the main body of it. And I put on Twitter, as you knew as far back as 2014 that you're using unqualified, inexperienced officers to oversee complex CSA cases, yet it took a report, a HMICFR report, to explain to you that you were making the mistakes. And I also put, it's an accountability meeting. How the hell is it when you edit questions, taking out the key part and putting people's names to questions that they did not ask? They then responded back and they said they would answer this at the end of the meeting. And this is it here.
Agenda item 6, and that, do we have any more questions from the public? And I believe we do. Simon, is it typed up for me to read from, or shall I just read from the chat bar? Okay. Oh. There we go. So this is a follow-up question from Jane from Bentham, and she says, why are you not personally apologising to victims of CSA who you knowingly failed using unqualified, untrained officers? I want assurance that the victims will receive a personal apology and no other victim has to go through the living hell of what I know some endured. Chief Constable Lisa, you're going to answer this one.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Jane, firstly, apologies. I think we misinterpreted your original question as why haven't we offered an apology? And indeed, I would reiterate, you're right, the general apology that was given right at the outset and has been done on several occasions, that we are sincerely sorry for those failings of those families and children who we've let down for the reasons set out in the NCPI inspection report. I think what you're actually asking us, have we personally apologised to individual victims and families in those cases where the crime was allocated to an officer that didn't have the requisite skills? So I now understand fully exactly the point that you're making. I don't know whether we have made a personal apology, Jane, to each of those individual victims without going to each of those individual cases. As ACC Butterfield mentioned, those jobs were drawn out by HMIC, those reports were picked up, and we went back to those cases. I do not know, without going back to those individual cases, whether we then apologised during the follow-up to that individual family. What I will undertake to do is to draw on each of those jobs that you're talking about, draw on each of those investigations, and I will ensure that a personal apology is given to those families individually, because I think that's what you're asking for. But please contact us if that isn't the question or the point that you were trying to make. But I will undertake to draw each of those files out and make sure that the individual families and victims are contacted with an apology. Thank you, Jane.
So there you go. I've got a promise from the Chief Constable, Lisa Winwood herself, that those victims that had investigations that were overseen by officers that were either inexperienced, unqualified or not trained for the role are going to get a personal apology, and I hope it's a personal written apology and nobody's missed out. So obviously I won't know all of them. There'll be a lot of people that don't even know that it happened to them. So let's just see if she keeps to her word.